Hi, this is Jim. This is one of those crossover shows. This is broadcast also on hashtag trending. It's an interview with Brian Jackson, who is one of the analysts at InfoTech. It's not strictly about security, but it gives you a good foundation in some of the things that people are thinking about in IT, and there are some intriguing discussions about some issues that are related to cybersecurity. Hope you enjoy it. Have a great weekend. We will be back on Tuesday morning as we celebrate both Canadian and American Thanksgiving. Now here's the show. I think it's been more than a decade since I met this gentleman. When I was first at IT World Canada, Brian Jackson was an up-and-coming journalist. Even at that time, it was easy to spot the talent. Not only was he a great writer, but he had a strong analytical mind. As he progressed at IT World, moving from writer to editor, eventually to editor-in-chief, running all our publications, he continued to distinguish himself, not just as a writer and editor and a leader, but he also continued to be a driver behind a lot of our best analytics and research. So it was a bittersweet moment when he came to Fawn Annan and I to announce that he was moving on to work for InfoTech, and we'd miss him as a strong contributor to the publication, and by that time, as a friend. Our loss was not just InfoTech's gain, but it was also a gain for all of us in the industry who need solid research and analysis to help guide us or confirm that we're moving in the right direction. Now, we've met a few times at conferences, but we haven't had a chance to sit down and chat. So when Brian told me he had some new research he wanted to share with our audience, I said, hell yeah. And here he is, Brian Jackson. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Jim. And that's a very kind introduction. I really appreciate all that.
So before we get into our newest research with you, tell us who you are and what you do at InfoTech.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a principal research director at InfoTech Research Group. I've been leading the tech trends research for the past 5 years now. And then I also do the CIO priorities report, Jim. And I have a lot of CIO clients that I do advisory work with through a program I call the First 100 Days, being CIO, and then for a number of other strategy discussions, a lot of them revolving around emerging technology. So I'm able to come at IT from a mindset of let's research all the facts that are out there to inform what position I should take and what direction I should go in, rather than some sort of preconceived notion from having worked in the field and having different experiences. So that's worked out for me, and it continues to be a source of fascinating work.
So what's your latest piece of research?
We've got Tech Trends 2025, and we're looking at a future where there's big stakes, but bigger risks ahead of us that we have to mitigate along the way. And whenever I do a Tech Trends report, I'm looking at this sort of scenario analysis where, IT departments, Jim, they love their controls, right? They're trying to think about how do we stop the business from shooting itself in the foot? You have to. I mean, that's why the IT department is there. That's your job. But I want to push them beyond that, right? So while we have half of our trends focus on mitigating the risks and putting those controls in place, which are crucial, we also focus on seizing the opportunities, because these emerging technologies that we're talking about, they just hold tremendous value that if they're applied the right way, we could unlock more revenue, more advancement, doing better for the citizens that we serve if we're a government. So I want to focus there too.
Cool. So what are the big insights? You're a journalist, don't bury the lead. What are the big insights you take away from this?
Absolutely. Let me walk you through the 6 trends that we settled on for 2025, organized into 3 themes, right? So I talked about that opportunities versus the risks. We're looking at exponential AI. You know what? AI is integrated into everything we do. Well, almost everything. And if it's not there yet, it's going to be there sooner or later. So on the opportunity side, I'm looking at expert AI models. It's nice if we can adopt, ChatGPT, that helps, or Copilot. This is good. But these large language models, Jim, they're becoming a commodity asset. They're cheap, they're open source, anybody can tap into them. So it's no longer a source of differentiation. You have to have expert AI models that are trained on at least industry-based research, or even better, organization-oriented information. So you get purpose-driven answers for the problems that you want to solve. And then on the mitigate risk side of things, we're looking at AI sovereignty. And it's it's like going back to cloud sovereignty, but there's more dimensions to it, right? So with cloud sovereignty, we thought about, oh, we have to have the cloud storage on our shores, right? And that's what governments were worried about. But this matters to a lot of private organizations too. And with AI, there's more than just data confidentiality to worry about, which is a big concern too. But we also want to maintain top performance controls, and we want to make sure that the costs don't get overrun. Yeah. So then we go through, I can go through the other themes here, and
let's go through the other themes and we can come back for some individual questions.
Sounds good. All right. So we've got pre-quantum foundations, and we're looking at the early days attaining quantum advantage with computing. It's not here just yet, but it's an important milestone of quantum utility has been achieved. And we're looking at a runway of maybe 5 years that some quantum computing vendors are predicting they will get to that quantum advantage, which means that certain industries, Jim, will just be able to solve problems they haven't been able to solve previously. That's a big deal. Now, that's for some industries. For some leading edge organizations, they'll look at quantum computing, but everybody has to think about post-quantum cryptography, which is trend number 4. Because we need to migrate our encryption before quantum computing and hack it and break it. It's a big problem, and we got to get working on it. And the last theme of the report, Jim, is digital humans. We're looking at AI avatars. I've seen your deepfake, so you're into this. I have a deepfake too. I hate it, but it's easy to generate now. And we're finding a lot of legitimate applications for AI avatars, and they're being deployed at a rapid rate throughout the economy. And then there's the negative side of that, is the bad guys are using them too. So we need deepfake defense. How do we prevent being fooled by deepfakes? Like that poor guy in Hong Kong that wired $25 million when he thought his CFO was calling him, right? Everyone's heard that story by now.
Yeah. And it sounds like a lot going on. I will tell you, and I've seen some other research, and obviously in my current job, I try to keep up with all of the trends. I think you're totally on the right track when you talk about that movement from controls to seizing the opportunities. I've been doing this for a long time. I started with Result Station with DMR in the 1980s and 90s. And, we were talking about results at that time. I think we finally we've got that balance to the tipping point. People are still worried about costs. They're never going to stop. That's part of business. You sell something for a high price, you make it for a lower price. That's called business. But I'm seeing a much bigger movement of people talking about exploiting technology and getting opportunities and getting revenue from it. Are you seeing the same thing?
We are. And the CIOs I talk to are very aware that it's no longer sufficient to be a backroom operator, right? We can't be an order taker that's reacting to business requests and business requirements. You have to be proactive. You have to be at the strategic level. And if the CIO wants to be sitting at the same table as the other executives, I think this is the opportunity to advise them on the capabilities that emerging technology brings to the table, talk about how does it align to the business strategy, and guide them.
Yeah. A friend of mine who's a great consultant once told me, said, be where the business is and talk like they do. And what do they talk about? They don't talk about costs in IT. They talk about revenue. They only talk about cost in IT when you're coming to them and you haven't delivered what.
I agree.
Cool.
I tell something similar to CIOs that are thinking about, well, how do I justify this cost or that cost? And I say, don't talk about what costs you've incurred. Talk about the value that you've delivered to the enterprise and tie your costs to clear outcomes.
I still remember the CFO said to me, Jim, I've got a stack of business cases on my desk, and if they were all true, we'd be operating at zero cost and making billions. Said, we're not. Something's wrong. I want to move on to this idea of AI because I think it's one of those areas. I have returned to doing some strategic consulting, but I'm doing it mostly in AI and cybersecurity. I'm going back to people and saying, stop talking about AI and start talking about what you want to get from it. What are your results that you want to get from it? Are you getting a sense that people are starting to get off it's cool to what do I get from it?
Yeah, you never want to be in that position where you're talking about technology for technology's sake. So often I do find myself saying something similar to my clients, Jim, because they'll come to us and say, what do I use AI for? And I say, well, what are your problems? Like, what problem are you trying to solve? And that's always where the conversation should start. It's not, where should I apply this technology? We should always start from a position of, what are the big problems and challenges the business is facing? Where could we potentially go for opportunities to earn new revenue, open up new markets, unlock capabilities that make us more productive? But that being said, I think that educating yourself about the emerging technologies that are available, learning about the use cases in even other industries, not only your own, because it can be eye-opening what other industries are doing with this too, and be quite inspiring, I think. Being aware of that and educating yourself is necessary, because you have to know what is capable of in order to identify where it's going to be used, right? So it's sort of a balancing act of not being too dead set on using it because it's something that's cool, but using it because it's something that's actually better than what you're doing today.
That's really good advice, I think, because we talk about this, don't fall after cool tools, but the reality is you need to be out there experimenting. And what are some of the ideas you've seen that have really worked or excited you?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of a large Canadian retailer, and try not to name any organizations here today, just to make sure that I don't cross any wires. But this large retailer, they have a great innovation program where they were cautious, right? So they identified with generative AI one pilot that they would try first from a number of ideas. And they actually deployed something that was customer facing and helped their customers execute on their shopping, right? And it was the type of thing where you're shopping and there's a lot of details that you need to know about the product you're buying, but not everybody's an expert in that thing, right? So, normally you're doing a lot of Google searching, or you've got out some sort of product information sheet. It's stressful for the customer. It's hard to get done, and it stops a lot of transactions. But with this chatbot, they were able to just guide the consumer through the process, no problem, and right in line with the e-commerce application, educate them about what they needed to know. And they saw a great uplift in the number of purchases that it was driving, right? Which is the name of the game. So after that success, they said, okay, we've got one business use case here proven. Let's go back to the other ideas that we had, because they were pretty good too. We might have prioritized this one to start with, but there were other ideas there that may be worth developing. And if this technology works in one area, maybe it'll work for other areas. And now they're going through implementations of AI for training and AI for a back office optimization. And I think that's what is going to happen next year is we'll get over that first pilot. People will see that there is business value there. And then suddenly it'll be applied in many different areas.
Yeah. And I think that's the way to do it. I used to do something similar with my own clients. And I would say, pick little things that are under the radar, but they're bugging people, and find those things you can do, because then you can build some credibility. I also told them to try several things at the same time and I think this is a good way, sort of by stealth, because one of them might fail. Nothing, two of them might be okay. One of them might knock it out of the park,
Right.
So it's sort of like how I've stayed married this long. I lower people's expectations, particularly my wife's.
Yeah, it's a smart strategy for a lot of different things.
Yeah. So let's talk about these expert AI models. I'm fascinated by this.
Great.
I think this is the future of AI is intelligent agents that can cooperate and collaborate. And I think a lot of people are starting to see this. And what's your picture of that? What does the research tell you? What are you thinking about?
Let me start with an example here too, because I think this really illustrates it when you see it in action in the real world. I think we're all familiar with Moderna, one of the companies that developed a vaccine. Probably many of us took during the COVID time. And did you know that Spikevax vaccine that Moderna developed was its first ever product to market?
No, I didn't know that at all.
Yeah.
This was their first vaccine?
Yeah, that's right. That mRNA delivery mechanism. We all remember that innovation. And it was something they developed, but Spikevax was the first time that they actually commercialized a product. So the company is looking at that success and saying, let's do more of that and a lot more of it, a lot faster. So their goal over the next 5 years is to launch 15 new products to market. And how are they going to accelerate that? With AI. So they've got ChatGPT Enterprise. They deployed it. And what they encourage their employees to do is go and make their own chatbots, just like you and I can do with a custom GPT, right, on the consumer version of the tool. And the employees are doing it. So for example, one chatbot is called Dose ID. And what it does is it pours through Moderna's vast research, and it's looking at a pharmaceutical question of what's the right amount of the active ingredient to put into one dose, right? So when you're deciding on the vaccine, for example, you have to say, well, how much of that, what's the size, how many milliliters is in one dose? What's the right number? And it'll make recommendations to the researchers. And of course, they get to review that. There's a human in the loop here. We're not automating this away, but it's data that they can review and they can visualize it and they can see how it got to that conclusion. And that's hugely helpful for them. And then another department, the legal department, they created a chatbot that does contract reviews. So they can upload their contracts and ask questions about it and see if they're covered for their mitigations, the risks they want to avoid. And that's really helpful and time saving for them. So it just is one example of a company that's, sort of enabling their employees with AI in a way that doesn't require you to code, but is incredibly powerful and brings the capability to bear directly on your business process with the information that you need to work with.
I think you pointed it out, is this idea of, in the early stages, let's focus on augmentation. Let's focus on helping the people and never letting them step away from responsibility, but to help them with either the difficult tasks or the things that they'll never get to. I mean, people say, well, AI makes mistakes. They're saying, give me 1,000 documents to read. I'm going to make a mistake. Sorry. We better have a better system than depending on a human to read 1,000 documents. So, at the same time, if we're augmenting, I think we probably can explore more. And it's funny because there's some stats I got to produce the daily podcasts. I read a lot of news. And one of the things I saw today, and it just lit up at me, was the number of people who've now figured out they laid off people too quickly, or they never were laying them off because productivity was getting so great with AI. There's a whole hiring binge starting in India, and it'll probably come back here as well because people jumped too fast to get rid of people. I think that's a mistake that you can make. What do you advise your clients to do when they're talking about dealing with the issues of how should I be dealing with people and communicating with them?
Yeah, it's all about education and training. To your point there about this fear of AI replacing us, let's focus on using AI as a way to be better at what we do and to augment our jobs and to actually give you more time back in your day. I think that most people, since the pandemic, everybody sort of feels like they're over capacity, that they're stressed out, that they can't keep up. And AI can be one tool that you use to do certain things more quickly or more effectively. And you look at some of the examples of how it's being deployed, like let's look at call centers, for example, right? So a lot of people are, there is the route where there's AI agents with synthetic voices even. But Jim, when you get an AI agent and you can tell it's a robot on the other end, how long are you really going to spend talking to that robot generally?
It depends on how useful they are. I prefer to talk to a chatbot that can search and give me the stuff right away rather than a human who I can't get. I've got to wait 45 minutes for, who's going to read a manual back to me anyway. So on that level, I'm there. And I think, I went onto Apple's and you pay 3 times as much to have an Apple computer. I expect really good service. I got on there and I was AI and I did the same reaction. I went, oh God, not you guys. Turns out their AI chatbot is just perfect. It can schedule a meeting. It can do things. And everybody at Apple answers stuff from a manual anyway. They read the manual. They do exactly what Apple tells them to do. So that for me is fast. But I think the best ones I've seen are when you need to talk to a person, and I've dealt with one of them. I was dealing with Ground News. It's a small little newsletter that comes out and it gives you a really good look at what's happening in the world. And I use it a lot for research. So it'll tell you whether an article is left leaning, whether it's right leaning, whether it's center, how true it is. So they really assemble a lot of different articles from a lot of different topics and show you all of the news that's out there. So I contact them, and of course they've got an automated thing that you can use. But out of nowhere, a person contacted me, said, "We understand that you've had a problem. We'd like to help you." And I said, "Are you a bot?" And she said, "No, I'm a real person." And I went, "Oh." And that's the type of thing I think that people can have a response. Yes, there can be an automated response, but there can also be a real person. This is the crazy thing about Ground News. I just love them to death. I'm $9 a year in my subscription. It's not costly, but they still found the time to say, pay attention to that person. That person needs a personal response. The rest of it we can automate. Absolutely the right thing to do. So
That's great.
Knowing that you can reach a person,
Yeah.
I find I'm free to do whatever I want.
Yeah, I agree with you where I will prefer AI as long as I feel like it's effective and I'm getting the problem solved. But often I find that if I have a little bit more of a complicated problem, you get 2 layers deep and it's just going nowhere. And then I'm like, okay, how do I get to a human? So one interesting deployment for AI in the call centers is a pairing. So you still have human agents answering the phone, or maybe they're behind an initial intake process, but a person is talking to the customer. So you have the call center agent, you have the customer, and the call center agent is seeing the AI generated responses on their screen. So the AI is listening to the customer, suggesting to the human, here's how you might answer this. And then that contact center person can use their judgment, right? Is this the right response, or does this actually require something else? And this robot is not telling me where I need to go. And it's way better than conversation branching, right? Which was more difficult and sometimes led you into niche places that you couldn't back out of. And it's just a perfect union for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to let you get away without talking about quantum, but I do want to finish one last thing in AI, and that's AI sovereignty. This idea of it's because it is double layered. On one, you have the physical security and sovereignty and ownership of your data. The other is you have whether AI can learn from your data.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are the double-edged sword in there, or at least the 2 points of the problem.
Ever since ChatGPT was launched to the web almost 2 years ago, the first thing organizations were concerned about was that their employees would be going on to this commercial tool and dumping sensitive data into it, right? And that would be equated to a data leak. So we're a couple of years into this, and these AI vendors are getting more savvy about how to serve the enterprise. And now if you have a conversation with any of them, like the Microsofts, the AWS, even ChatGPT and the enterprise version that I mentioned earlier, they'll promise you, we won't train your data, or we won't train our models on your data, right? So your data is your data. You have your own instance of your model. That's data confidentiality is only one of the things that we want to control over as IT administrators, right? So the other 2 aspects that we saw in our survey that really mattered when evaluating generative AI solutions are the quality. And there's a lot of different performance standards you can consider, from, accuracy to latency. And while it seems pretty good that you can ask ChatGPT anything and get an answer in a few seconds, sometimes a few seconds is just too long for a business process, and you need something instantly, or you need almost real-time reaction, right? So that's when you have to look at smaller purpose-built models and maybe put them right on the device. And then you have to look at costs. That's the other factor that's incredibly important, because I think that a lot of people migrated to the cloud, maybe didn't refactor their environment as properly as they should have, thought that it would be a cost savings, and then found out they were shifting their capital costs to operating costs. right? So
Oop.
they're getting big monthly bills every month. So we have to keep in mind that when we're using these cloud-based models, we're paying per token for these API exchanges, and we have to be aware of how that will scale and how that will affect the bill at the end of the month.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you, somebody's going to get that $20 billion back or $30 billion or whatever they're putting in, or hundreds of billions of dollars. They're not going to spend that and invest that and not get it back. I think we're in for a real cost rise in AI. I'm not the only person saying that. A lot of rumors are saying that OpenAI will double its cost by the end of the year. So having a strategy to look at that, or do you have any ideas of what people should be doing based on what we learned about the cloud?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The great thing is that there's a lot of different models that are available, and they all have different cost structures. First of all, you can compare your large language models. Let's just use OpenAI's models as an example here. If you use Chat GPT-4, that's a more expensive model than GPT-4o. And they release differently priced models at different rates because they're aware of this factor. So that's just one example where you can say, maybe this model is 2% worse than the other model at giving me the answer I want, but it's still totally satisfactory for the use case that I'm designing. And another way that you might save money is you say, you know what, I don't want to pay a per transaction every time. I'm just going to own the model and host it myself, or put it right on the device where it's being used. So if the model can be small enough and it's reasonable enough for you to host it, sometimes you can host them just fine on a normal desktop computer, and the performance is better because it's not in the cloud anymore. So that can avoid the costs per transaction as well. So there's a number of different strategies you have to take, but the real answer is that you have to look at the problem that you're solving first and determine, what's most important here. Is it that I spend as little as possible, or is this a problem that I'm actually willing to throw money at it, because if I solve it, it'll be so valuable to my organization.
Despite that, I'm still recommending model independence with people. And that is that whatever solution you build, make sure it's model independent. Use at least two, and the reason I did that for me was the models get stupid, and I don't, they change. If you watched all of these models, they change in how effective they are. I can shift between Claude and OpenAI. There's still some others that I'm still working through Google's Notebook LM and their AI, but I've kept at least 2 or 3 different models that I can shift between, just because, and sometimes they just fail. So the model independence is one thing I think. Are you seeing people using multiple models?
Definitely. I think that that's just the nature of using these LLMs. And when I talk about the commoditized aspect of it, this is one of the things I mean, because you can design your application. So say that call center application, right? It's running that script. It's hearing the person describe their problem, and then it puts it into a prompt to a large language model to get the proper response. You could have one of several models. You could have Claude. You could have OpenAI's GPT model. You could have one of the Amazon models if you wanted to. I think they're available too if you're using something like Bedrock to build your application. So it's almost interchangeable, and you can plug in the model that you need at that moment. And if it's not available, you can fail over to the next model that does the job just as well, right? So absolutely, multiple models are. It's something that anyone that's going past, the turning on applications that have AI features, if they're building their own, they're definitely tapping into multiple.
NVIDIA dropped a bomb last week. They have their 72 billion parameters. It's not the 1.79 trillion parameters of OpenAI, but the early testing is coming back. This thing is fantastic in terms of its results. It can run on very limited hardware. It's open source, and they're giving away their training metrics, the numbers they use in the training, and all of that as one package. It's now open source. I think it's going to drop a bomb in terms of the world.
That's right. Now, yeah, I think open source is a big future for these models. Not only the mega-sized models like NVIDIA's released, but many smaller, more purpose-built models that are meant to do one specific job that's really in demand in certain industries.
Let's talk about the security side of this and the dark side of the force here too, or the positive, depending on you've got these digital humans and deep fakes. I mean, it really is two sides of the coin. You've got one hand, you've got digital humans, the other, you've got deep fakes. You've got a security issue and you've got a promise of the technology. Where are you seeing that go?
Well, I'm very concerned about the deepfake defense. And I think this is a major risk that we'll have to do a lot of work to mitigate. And it's sort of a new wrinkle in the cybersecurity aspect of consideration. Now, organizations spend more on cybersecurity year in, year out. It feels like you can't go by a year without 5%, 10% increase to your cybersecurity costs. But the bad guys are getting more sophisticated and more aggressive year after year. With AI powered capabilities, we're going to see that reach even higher scales that we have to react to and we have to be ready for. Now, one thing that I noted in the report is that the World Economic Forum, we're ranking what are the greatest threats to the world over the next couple of years. And number one wasn't climate change or war, which there are multiple wars happening in the world, and climate change seems to bring bigger, more destructive storms all the time. The number one risk was misinformation and
Yeah.
disinformation. And they said that AI is going to heighten it to all-time levels of concern. And deepfakes are going to be a big problem. And you mentioned open source, right? And while open source can be great because it can open up innovation for anyone that can get their hands on the tool and start editing it, that's true for the bad guys too. So they have these AI video editors, they have these AI image generators, and they're removing all the restrictions that these more well-meaning AI vendors put in place. And they're going to use those to imitate celebrities, imitate politicians, imitate your CFO and fool you into wiring a bunch of money over, or maybe influencing an election. So I think that we're going to be seeing interesting times ahead where we feel like we can't trust our own eyes with what we see on the internet.
I'm calling it the death of truth. I don't think I'm the first person to coin a phrase like that, but this is a real situation for everyone and one of concern. And I talked about NVIDIA dropping this perfect model, training data, metrics, all those things, pick it up and run it. But now that's in the hands of everybody. There are no guardrails, no restrictions on using it. What do you do when you put that in the hands of crooks? This idea that even if we take the cybersecurity out of it, when we stop being able to count on what is truth, the underpinnings of society go away. And I don't know how much you've been reading up on this, but everybody's trying to figure out a way to label AI generated content. And not one company or one person has come up with an idea that's going to work, at least so far.
Yeah, the problem with watermarking AI content, and while I think that this will happen, where if you get an image generated out of ChatGPT, there can be a watermark on there to say that it came from the generator. That's a good idea. It's a good way, easy way to recognize when something's being made by AI. The problem is it's so easily removed. It only stops the honest thief. And of course, with these open source tools, the bad guys will be able to just go in there and remove any watermarking that's built into these models.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I want to talk to you a little bit about quantum, because you mentioned that as one of the trends and I don't want to let that go. I did an interview, I think a few months back, with a company in Canada that has a quantum solution. So, and I was amazed. I would not have said this. I was amazed to see that there are actually quantum solutions in operation now, not the big quantum computers, but people are already starting to move towards that.
Yeah, to speak to the Canadian example there, we can start there. D-Wave is a Canadian company. And in fact, they have Canadian customers that are deploying quantum to commercial operations. One case study they walked me through recently was with Pattinson Food Group, which is the groceries chain on the West Coast. And they've optimized their delivery routes. So every grocery store started delivering groceries during the pandemic. And a big problem is, how do we get to all these different addresses as efficiently as possible, given the traffic conditions, given all the different streets that you can take to get there. And quantum computing is perfect for that type of optimization problem. So that's one interesting solution that's in the field. Now it's a hybrid solution. Quantum computing doesn't do every aspect of the problem, but it solves the key part of it, the key challenge. We're talking about the most leading edge companies in the world, but you look at a company like HSBC, a bank in the finance sector here, and they're experimenting with how to use quantum computer to counter fraud attempts, to do better trading optimizations, to do better simulation of the market so they can inform their customers better. So they see a number of potential advantages. The trick, though, is that you need really rare niche talent. I mean, how many quantum mathematical PhDs are floating around in the world? Not too many. So the talent is the barrier right now. Surprisingly, access to the hardware is not the barrier. You or I, Jim, could go and spin up an instance of a cloud computer running on real quantum hardware on IBM's quantum cloud.
Yeah. And there's a quantum institute in Canada that's actually encouraging the use of quantum computers. And I've had the head of that group on our program as well. I don't oversell it either, but two things. One is it's there. It's time to start the education and start learning about it, I think, for people. But the other, and it was a realistic thing that you pointed out, and I'll put my Cybersecurity Today hat on, and that is, if you've got all this data and you haven't got it encrypted and it's stolen today, it can be used when quantum comes up and can crack your encryption. I'm not saying it's for Joe's Corner Store, Apple's encryption or, on your hard drive is just fine. I'm happy to just see it encrypted, and I'm happy to see with a good password. But there are cases where people have highly sensitive data today that they really need to start thinking about, that if that's stolen today, it could be cracked tomorrow. And would that matter?
This is the problem that you're describing with these harvest now, decrypt later. And, there's a day called Q Day. Q Day is someday in the future where quantum computing will be sufficiently powerful to crack RSA encryption, which is basically all of the encryption that we rely upon to do business on the internet. The encryption that makes bank transactions possible. The encryptions our governments use to make our records secure. So you could imagine if all data was decrypted tomorrow and just available for anybody to go and have, there'd be a big problem in the world, right? And now this day, Q Day, unfortunately, it's not like Y2K, where you can just circle a date on the calendar and know exactly when it's going to happen, but it will happen some date in the future. Whether it's going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or 15 years from now, we can debate that. And smarter people than me have definitely done so. But the message is that you can migrate your encryption now, and you should, because of these harvest now, decrypt later attacks. So especially if you're in government. In fact, if you're a U.S. federal agency, by law, you have to have a plan on how to migrate your encryption to be post-quantum ready less than 1 year from now.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Brian, thank you so much for this. Before you go, what's your final takeaway for people who've heard this? And of course, how do they get a copy of the report?
Great. The easiest way, right now, we have it front page on infotech.com. So if you come there, you won't miss it. You can download it. And look out, we're having a webinar later in the month. It's open to everybody, not just InfoTech clients. So if you haven't registered and you're not able to download it, or you don't want to sign up for the account to get a trial and download it, that's fine. Just come to the webinar and we'll tell you what you need to know. And of course, we've given the overview here as well, Jim.
Great. Brian, thank you so much. This has been fabulous. We got to get you on more. We'll have to make this a regular thing.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's been great to be back on hashtag trending again.
Yeah, the guy who started it. I should have celebrated that. Brian was the first host of hashtag trending and built it into someday all this will be yours, Jim. My guest today has been Brian Jackson, as research director at InfoTech. Don't forget infotech.com. You can get a copy of the report and go to his webinar because he's a smart guy and you should go. And you'll find it even more than what you heard about on this program. Thanks, Brian, for coming by. And thank you to our audience for spending part of your weekend with us. You could be doing anything else. You chose to spend the time with us, and that's fabulous. Thank you very much. That's our show for this week. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a great weekend.